Ladies and gentlemen, do you believe that the New Year's bell can bring hope? In a small town in America, some believe that the bell brings a curse. This story was told to me by an elderly resident of the town. Although I'm not sure how much of it is true, I haven't dared to listen to the bell alone at midnight since I heard it. It was the last day of 1920, in a town called Ealingwood, known for its ancient bell tower despite its small population. Since its construction, the bell tower has rung 12 times every new year, symbolizing the end of the old year and the beginning of the new. But that year, no one wanted to stay near the bell tower because of a terrible event the year before. It is said to be the story of a young girl named Macy. She was 18, innocent and cheerful, often helping children in town learn to sing hymns. On New Year's Eve that year, she and her friends decided to wait under the bell tower for the bell to ring in the new year. When the bell struck the 6th time, her friends noticed Macy was gone. They searched for her and found her shoes in the stairwell of the bell tower, but she had vanished. In the following months, the townspeople began to hear the bell acting strangely. Sometimes it would ring early for no reason, other times it would be delayed. Even more eerie, there were several instances where the bell rang a 13th time. Whenever the bell was abnormal, someone would disappear in the following days, as if swallowed by the bell tower. Everyone was terrified and began to stay away from the bell tower. Some even suggested tearing it down, but no one dared to approach the tower. The story returns to New Year's Eve in 1920. That night, the streets of the town were eerily quiet, with most people hiding at home, windows locked, unwilling to hear the bell. But one person dared to challenge this taboo. His name was Jack, a young man in his early 20s who had just returned to his hometown from afar. Jack didn't believe in the legends about the bell tower, he thought they were just stories old townsfolk told to scare children. He decided to welcome the new year under the bell tower, even jokingly saying to his family, "If the bell can eat people, then I'll go find the bell for an explanation." As midnight approached, Jack, wearing a heavy coat and holding a kerosene lamp, walked towards the bell tower. He stood under the tower, looked up at the towering structure, and smirked. He shouted, "Come on, bell. Let's see what you're capable of." When the bell began to ring, Jack remained fearless. The first strike was clear and resounded through the silent night sky. He lit a cigarette and smoked leisurely. The second and third strikes remained steady, but starting from the fourth, the air turned unusually cold. The flame of his kerosene lamp flickered as if an invisible wind swirled around. By the 6th strike, Jack started to feel something was amiss. He seemed to hear whispers around him, soft and coming from all directions, yet indistinct. He looked around, trying to find the source of the sound, but all that surrounded him was darkness and cold wind. The 7th strike rang, and his kerosene lamp suddenly went out, plunging the world into darkness. Jack shivered, fumbling to relight the lamp. As he bent down, he heard footsteps coming from inside the bell tower, slow and heavy, as if someone was walking down the stairs one step at a time. The 8th strike sounded, and Jack looked up sharply towards the entrance of the bell tower. After the lamp went out, his eyes had adjusted to the darkness, and he faintly saw a figure. The figure was tall and thin, wearing an old coat that was too long, with arms hanging abnormally low as if the bones had been elongated. His face was clearly visible in the dim light of the shadow. His complexion was deathly pale as if smeared with ashen paint, his eyes fixed on Jack, sharp and cold, like needles piercing the heart. Most chilling was his mouth, with the corners split to the cheeks, forming a twisted smile, revealing a row of teeth as fine as needles, as if this smile could swallow everything. Jack's legs froze, and his throat was so dry he couldn't make a sound. The figure suddenly tilted its head slightly, moving eerily like a puppet being controlled, then raised its hand, with long, thin, and dry fingers, nails like sharp hooks, slowly reaching towards Jack. The 9th strike, Jack took a step back and stepped on something, almost falling. He looked down and saw an old shoe with "Macy" engraved on it. His breathing became rapid, and his heart pounded. The 10th strike, the strange figure was even closer, and he could almost hear the clicking, strange sound from the mouth that was split to the cheeks, as if laughing, but also like the sound of bones rubbing. The 11th strike, Jack could no longer bear it. He turned and ran, trying to escape the bell tower. His footsteps were urgent and chaotic, but the figure's footsteps were always slow, yet eerily able to follow closely behind. Jack dared not look back and could only run forward desperately. When the final bell tolled, Jack's scream pierced the night sky and then abruptly stopped. The next day, the townspeople found only Jack's kerosene lamp and an old shoe under the bell tower. Since then, no one has dared to approach the bell tower. The bell still rings every New Year, but those who have heard it say that its 12th strike is no longer as loud and clear as before, but deep and hoarse, as if mocking something. Ladies and gentlemen, would you still listen to the bell at midnight on New Year's? It was a long time ago, when I was young, rebellious, and without a proper job, making a living by stealing. On December 31st, I had already planned to go to a wealthy neighborhood because almost all the residents were on vacation. I had found out in advance which households were empty and intended to take advantage of New Year's Eve to steal some valuable items. That night, I successfully broke into several homes and stole quite a few valuables. Everything went smoothly until I arrived at the house with the blue roof. This house was no different from the others, with doors and windows tightly closed and an air of silence. I pried open the window and climbed in, carefully looting the first floor before heading upstairs. As I walked down the hallway, a voice came from behind a tightly closed door. "Richard, is that you?" It was a hoarse, weak voice, like that of an elderly woman, drifting through the door crack and into my ears. I froze on the spot, nearly dropping the flashlight in my hand. How was this possible? This house was supposed to be empty, I had checked thoroughly. I held my breath, my heart pounding, not daring to make a sound. However, the woman's voice sounded again, this time more urgent. "Whoever you are, could you help me? My leg is not very convenient." Her voice sounded very weak, and although I was somewhat scared, I decided to take a risk. I tried to respond calmly, "I'm a friend of Richard's, he asked me to come and get some things." There was a few seconds of silence inside, and then she said softly, "Then come in, I need your help." I hesitated, but ultimately decided to go in and see. I carefully pushed the door open, and as it slowly opened, it revealed a dark and cold room with no lights on, and the air seemed to be filled with a strong musty odor. I stood at the doorway, holding my breath, trying to see what was inside. "Could you get the things out of the cabinet for me? My leg is not convenient, and I can't stand up." Her voice was still weak, as if buried in the darkness. I mustered the courage to walk into the room, searching for the source of the voice. But when I stood in the center of the room, I suddenly realized that there was no one in the room at all. All the furniture was covered with a thick layer of dust, and there were no signs on the chairs or the bed, not at all like someone lived there. "Where are you?" I asked nervously, my heart pounding. But there was no response from the room. The oppressive silence was suffocating. At that moment, the door suddenly slammed shut. I rushed to the door, only to find it locked tight, unopenable. "Where are you?" My voice trembled, almost shouting. However, the only response was the cold air. I began to sweat profusely, and in my panic, I felt something in the room staring at me, a cold breath approaching from behind. "I've been waiting for Richard." The hoarse voice sounded again, this time close to my ear, as if standing right behind me. At that moment, I felt my blood almost solidify, and my fear reached its peak. I could no longer control myself, turned and fled desperately, rushing down the stairs, not bothering to close any doors or windows, and ran straight to the street until I was far away from the house with the blue roof. It was on a New Year's Eve a few years ago when I decided to spend my vacation alone in a cabin in the mountains. This cabin was located deep in the mountains, surrounded only by an endless snowy landscape and a silent forest. Hunting was how I passed the time in the mountains. That day, I set out early with my rifle and entered the forest. The snowfall was not heavy, but as I ventured deeper into the woods, an eerie silence enveloped the area. No sounds of animals, not even the wind seemed to blow. Just as I was about to turn back, there was a sudden movement from the depths of the forest. Upon closer inspection, I vaguely saw a tall figure. This figure had two massive antlers on its head, and I couldn't identify what it was. It was not any animal I had ever seen before. I raised my rifle, attempting to aim at it, but the figure moved in another direction. Almost involuntarily, I began to follow it, my eyes fixed on that eerie silhouette. As I approached, it moved slowly but always maintained a distance, as if waiting for something. My mind was set on one thought: to capture that creature. I quickened my pace, trying to close the gap between us, yet it always disappeared into the shadows of the forest at the last moment, only to reappear on the other side. This pattern continued until my patience and stamina began to wane. Suddenly, I felt something approaching from behind. I turned quickly, but saw nothing. My heartbeat grew louder, and my breathing became labored. When I turned back, the figure had vanished, leaving only the howling of the wind and snow in the air. As the sky darkened and the snowfall intensified, I realized things were going awry and turned to run back towards the cabin. But at that moment, the creature appeared right in front of me. It was closer than before, its massive size looming, the antlers on its head glinting like the scythe of death in the darkness. A strong sense of fear washed over me. The creature no longer waited, it lunged at me with ferocity. In a panic, I raised my rifle but lost my aim due to the chaos. I pulled the trigger, the bullet grazed its body, but it couldn't stop it. The next second, I felt a sharp pain as my body was violently knocked down into the snow. The creature's body was like cold steel, pressing down on me, suffocating me. I struggled desperately, my hands flailing, trying to push it away, but all in vain. My vision began to blur, and I felt my strength rapidly ebbing away. Then, I felt its claws suddenly grasp my shoulders, and everything went blank. When I opened my eyes again, I was lying in a hospital bed. The nurse told me that I was found collapsed in the snow with severe frostbite, nearly losing my life. The police came to inquire about what happened, but I couldn't explain the events of that night. The villagers said I must have been disoriented by the blizzard and hallucinating. But I know, it was not a hallucination.